Welcome to the second edition of Valley Vision. This is GCTV's new news magazine format program, and we feature events and people from around our viewing area. My name's Larry Molczyk, and I'm one of the volunteer producer programmers here for GCTV. And the segments that you'll see this evening are programs that I've produced. When I first met Bucky Callery, he was first carving duck decoys on his coffee breaks and during his lunch hour at the woodworking shop where we both worked. So together, let's both take a look at what he's been up to for the past few years, and we'll go to Gill, Massachusetts, and take a look at the art of deception.
One of the reasons why I was attracted to decoys, or birds in particular, is because their lifestyle is very unique. They get to migrate, they get to go like to South America, southern United States, coastal regions during the summer, and in the wintertime they get to go up to Canada, northern United States. They get to hang out on these beautiful ponds. They can fly. This is my personal favorite here. It's a Hudsonian curlew, and it's kind of funny, a personal favorite because they're all personal favorites. It was done the old-fashioned way, very time-consuming. The beak is connected to the head. In the back here, I've driven a wedge in. It's an old traditional way of putting a beak in. If a beak was put in this way and it broke when a hunter was hunting for these particular birds, they could fix it in their own rudimentary way. They would see the bird in its natural setting, and they would interpret how that bird would look like as a decoy. And they had to simplify the form, they had to simplify the color, the plumage, they had to bring all this together and in a simplified form, and that's, to me, is part of the beauty of a decoy. Incredible what they were able to produce without machine tools. I first got interested in decoy carving when I saw a stamp put up by the Postal Service. It was a picture of a broad-billed decoy, and the lines were beautiful, and I said to myself, I can do that. It looks like a fun project. So being the foolish person that I am, I was working in a woodworking shop at the time, and I thought about different ways of making a decoy, and I asked a few people, and I come up with a method of cutting 3 small pieces of wood and gluing them together to get a large piece, about 6 inches or so. That also served to save me a few extra dollars, because I figured if I'm going to try something, I don't want to waste $300 on a piece of wood. So I drew the picture, drew the outline of the decoy, and I started carving away without any real idea of how it was done. And it came out reasonably well. It was a lot of fun doing it. The process was great with you. Once I was just carving the form, the tail, the head of the duck, and got to be kind of like magical. All of a sudden, after working away for a couple hours, you have something that looks like a decoy. Of course, looking back, that particular one I thought was great at the time, but at this point, I wouldn't look at it the same way, but that's the way it goes. It was about 5 years ago that I did my first decoy, and this one's very similar to that in its construction and just my ability to see different things, just the experience of doing decoys. It seems the more experience you have, the more you see. You do one and then you work at it for 8 or 10 hours, and all of a sudden you don't like it. You see your mistakes in it. This, I see a lot of mistakes. To me, that's fine. I can deny that there are any if I want to as well, but that's okay. But it's a very traditional, early type one. I had no idea what I was doing when I started, so and it came out well in all those terms. And actually, it's I like it. Even though the beak is very unlike anything that I would make right now. I had no idea where to buy the eyes. I've come up with that. The head is sort of small and narrow. The neck has no real life to it. It's sort of straight, and where it connects to the body is very rudimentary, but it works. And that's what's great about it. And the more I see it, the more I like it. Since then, I've gone on to a little more detail. In fact, a lot more detail. And what's great about decoys is it's a level of development. It's a process that you can start here, you can start there. You can go on forever to refining your technique and your art form. I've been to museums and just being close up to decoys. Some of the modern day masters, they've created decoys that you could be right next to from 3 feet away, and you ask yourself, this is not a decoy. They look so alive, they look so real. As I made a few months ago, and it shows a lot more detail than something like the pintail, which is a more traditional way. This was sort of copied, worked from a famous artist that worked in Illinois in the Mississippi Flyway. These, as decoys have advanced in years, detail has got much more advanced. There's ways of making feathers, there's ways of recreating feathering, there's people spending a lot of time carving in feathers with a soldering iron, with specialized tools. Years ago, those guys really didn't have $3,000-4,000 in tools, just power carving tools that can enable you to get into ridges and smaller areas and cut your time by at least by 3/4. Speaking of tools, this is why don't we just go into the workshop and I'll show you some of the tools that I use, and just to give you an example of what's it? Here's a good example of how a decoy gets started. If you're fortunate enough to have a book around that, like so, a decoy pattern book, you can get the particular duck and you can make a little puzzle out of it, trace them out, put them on a rough form of wood like this, draw it right in, put the pattern on the top, trace it out, get your head pattern right here, then buy a $500 piece of equipment which is right here, and you're all set. What's great about decoy carving, it involves a lot of different elements. It involves art, it involves design, it involves physiology of animals, it involves just observation of nature. This particular piece is a black duck, and I've used this. This is very simple to have a book like that. Sometimes I don't. Like a seagull here, I wanted to do a seagull, and all I had to go on was this book right here, and I had to get my piece of wood, figure out what kind of wood I had, then make my dimensions smaller or larger according to my wood. I had to do all this figuring, make the form smaller, whereas having a pattern makes life a whole lot easier. These are sort of things you learn. Getting back to this black duck, which will eventually look something like this particular creature right here. When I do a duck the first time, I'll go to a master, someone who's recreated a decoy, and copy their decoy, and then the next two or three I'll take my chances. Start off with a block of wood. I draw the design on it. I draw it from this perspective, from this perspective. The first cut goes to the bandsaw, and I cut it out lengthwise, and I get this shape. I save the top view. I tack this back on, and I cut out this shape right here. And we'll end up with something like this. And at this point, I've worked with the number of dimensions. The head will go on separately. The head, once I get this cut out here, I'll get my middle lines, and I'll glue the head on separately. Once the head's on, I can begin carving, of course, depending on how you like to work. Some people will carve the body first and save the head for later. There's a lot of variety and variability in working. Everyone has their own methods. That's what makes this art form so great. And there's the spoke shave, and this takes a lot of wood off really quickly. You can see. Okay, the old old-timers would use this. Sometimes they'd get an axe and they'd get a big chunk of wood and they'd whittle away at it. I can't imagine anyone doing that. This tool really takes off a lot of wood quickly. I'll show you the difference. Now you can see just what I've taken off in a matter of seconds compared to a rasp. If I was to do this with a rasp, this is what some people, this is what they've done. A rasp. Some people still work this way even today. This is a whole different ballgame, and there's a lot of tools out there. There are some instances where you have to use a knife. This is any kind of a knife. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can buy them. You can get real expensive. There's all kinds of knives, and knives do a great job. They take a little bit longer, but they're fine. You have these X-Acto knives that work fine, and with decoys, there's all kinds of different places where you need different knives, and you just can use a variety of tools. You can actually do one with a $2 tool like this, and it might be a little bit harder, but the job can be done. These are dentist tools. This is to me, it's great. Some dentist friends that I told them I was carving, and they said, "Well, I have some great tools for you," and they come in handy. Regular pocket knives people use. We use filing. This is makeup for fingernails, whatever you emery things. Sometimes you have to smooth certain areas, and you just can't get into an area without a particular tool. And it's great to have them available. Now here's a little tool that it looks like I might have got from a dentist, but I didn't. I wish I had. It would have been a little cheaper, but it makes the same sound. Oh, no, it's not it. Yeah, there's that familiar sound. This. The other thing that it has in common with the dentist is that you will have a big bill eventually. The tool I used to use for stained glass, and it's used for etching in feather designs. And it makes it easier when you can put all these things together. Yeah, it would help to have an art degree just to make the painting that much easier, but it's just not necessary. And my feeling is that this art form comes from a time where men and women were more self-reliable, self-sufficient, independent. They had to do things on their own. They had to hunt. They had to use the decoys for hunting purposes. And we're sort of recreating that now, but I think the feeling is still there for me, and I'm sure a lot of other carvers feel the same way, that if it needs to be painted, I'll take the risk. Even though I don't have that art degree in painting, it's not my strong field. I can do it, I will do it, and that's the bottom line. Basically, where decoys originated, it started with the Indians. The Indians made some very simple decoys, but it has evolved quite significantly. People would say you could look at the sky and it was dark with birds, and after unrestricted hunting for a number of years, those numbers just were reduced to some birds became extinct, some birds you wouldn't find one in a whole season sometimes. For us, the government passed the migratory duck law in the early 20s, which limited the amount of ducks that a hunter could kill at one particular time. It restricted when they could hunt and what rifles they could use. Things have changed a bit since then, and in fact most people buy decoys now just for investment and for a mantelpiece, whereas before they were a utilitarian art form. Their main purpose was to attract ducks or waterfowl and to shoot them. And you can imagine the poor ducks after spending a whole summer in Canada or northern United States coming back and seeing the decoys there, and one duck would say to the other, boy, what a nice place to, boy, there must be a lot of vegetation to eat here because all these other ducks are there, and all of a sudden they would stop and they'd get shot at and whatever, and one would say to the other, I knew we shouldn't have left so early, and there's nothing wrong with shooting them. I mean, people, they're out there for us to eat. At this point in history, we're at a position where we have control over a number of aspects. So not just decoys, it's an environmental issue.